Series has a serious bra and panty fetish. I seriously mean that no female in this entire series seems to be able to cover up their panties with their skirts. They always seem 2 sizes too small. It's certainly nothing on the level of Labyrinth of Flames, but the fan service seriously overstays its welcome. Now, I've said this before, but please allow me to reiterate my stance on something like this. I have nothing against fan service. When it's used sparingly or tastefully, it can really add another level of humor to even a really serious show. But the problem is, if you overuse it, then it just becomes annoying, and nobody wants to watch it except pedophiles and perverts. Which, considering the inclusion of Yukari in this series, is probably what they were going for. Now, I will say that the opening and ending to this anime are fairly decent. Now, the opening is not really animated any better than the rest of the show, but it does something a little bit different. Unlike other anime which basically keep the same opening for an entire season, and may switch it out every now and then, this one is different in that it actually shows you highlights of the episode that's coming up next. Not to mention the song is pretty catchy, and I have to admit I'm a sucker for a good J-pop song. Or any J-pop song for that matter, so this is right up my alley, despite how sickeningly sweet some of the visuals can look at times. The cake is a lie! Now surprisingly, there's actually a lot of energy behind the ending to this anime as well, and ironically, I would call this the best part of the show if it weren't for the fact that it was filled with more friggin' fan service. Seriously, look at this thing! There's even a little bit of man service thrown in there too. However, I do have to be fair to this series and say that some of the visuals are actually genuinely creepy in this ending, and it does fit with the source material for the show. And, well, that J-pop tune is just so rockin'. Friggin' awesome. Now, as to the quality of the rest of the music, aside from the awesome J-pop, it's actually fairly decent. The problem is, it's not at all memorable. It serves its purpose, it fits the scene that it's in, there's nothing that's really inappropriate in this series, but nothing really stands out to me. In fact, well, you could pretty much run most of the classroom scenes without music in the background and it would work just as fine. It enhances the moment, but other than that, it's pretty much useless. Of course, there's an exception to every rule, and around episode 5, during a pool scene, one of the girls just spontaneously breaks out into a musical J-pop montage. The song itself is fairly catchy and actually pretty memorable, but the fact of the matter is this comes right out of nowhere and it doesn't seem to serve any purpose other than to pad out the episode and to give us even more copious amounts of fan service. Like we didn't have enough of that already. Another thing that I really should mention is the fact that if you're a big fantasy buff or mythology buff, you are going to have some serious problems with this show. The reason being, while they do manage to fit quite a few mythological creatures into this school, none of them are really very accurately portrayed, at least in the sense of classic folklore. Now don't get me wrong, they get parts of the mythology right, such as the vampire's need to suck blood, the succubus's ability to charm men into doing whatever she wants, and the snow woman's ability to control ice and water, but there are some parts that they just made up specifically for the show that make me scratch my head and wonder if they just pulled that part completely out of their ass. Here's a perfect example. The mathematics teacher at this school happens to be a Lamia, a half-woman, half-snake monster who's supposed to have pretty powerful poison and is supposed to be able to charm men the same way that the sirens or the succubus can. However, in this one, they give her some sort of appendage on the end of her tail that allows her to somehow inject knowledge straight into a person's mind while still giving them a pretty powerful electric shock. What? whatever the creators of the shows were smoking at the time, I could really use some about now. So all in all, I can't really call this a good show. After all, it was Studio Gonzo, so we only had a 50-50 chance of it being good from the start. And there is a lot of potential here. I mean, it takes place in a school for friggin' monsters, for crying out loud. But its characters are uninteresting, annoying, stereotypes, and it doesn't really have much of an overarching plot. True, the focus seems to be on the relationship between the two main characters, but I don't think that develops at all from episode 1 to the end of the series. It's just completely forgotten amongst all the fan service. Now, admittedly, there are a few good things about this show. There are a few parts of it that are genuinely funny or even touching at some points. But again, it's not really built upon, and there is no real change from episode to episode. It's extremely episodic, but the characters aren't interesting enough to sort of carry us in that direction. It's not like something like Sergeant Frog or Azumangadayo. Those are very character-driven series, but their characters are interesting enough to actually carry the series. And this is also a show that really does illustrate my point from earlier. It's a bad show, though not terrible, but it's still bad, but it has a kick-ass vampire in it. Well, she's definitely not in the series long enough to really warrant you watching the entire show for her. Inner Mocha is definitely one of the more interesting characters in the show. In fact, I think she gets more development than any other character, believe it or not. Not to mention, she friggin' looks awesome when she's beating up the bad guys. But again, these scenes are very short and she disappears quickly afterwards. Not to mention, her dialogue, well, she doesn't have much of it, and it's usually got this sort of superiority complex behind it. So all in all, if you really are interested in this series, I would steer you away and steer you toward the manga. Again, I've only read the first 2 volumes, but they are by and large far superior to this show. Though I do have to give Gonzo some credit, they do manage to pull off a consistently well-animated show this time around, with minimal use of action CG, which they seem to have a fetish for in most of their other shows. But again, it's not a very good show. It's just not. Though I will say they were smart enough not to, say, create a second season of this, which was just more of the same, with more annoying characters from both the manga and sprinkling in their own anime characters as well. Right? Oh my god, it's an army of Tim Currys!